Hi and welcome back. We've been going through a basic introduction to CSS and learning what we need to about CSS in order to create our project website. In this final section on the introduction, we're going to go ahead and discuss CSS Positioning and the CSS Box Model. So let's go ahead and get started. First off, I want to go ahead and delete everything that I had in my style sheet from the last video. And I'm also going to come here into my test.html and I'm going to delete everything from that as well, because we need a slightly different test HTML code in order to go through this exercise. So again, just like before, if you've downloaded the framework, on that same page there are some test HTML documents that you can use. If not, you're going to go ahead and type in the code that we're going to go ahead and get right now, but you'll see it all. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize Expression Web here, and here's my CSS HTML CSS test pages that I've downloaded, and specifically what we're looking for is test 2 here, and I'm going to right click on that and say edit with Expression Web, and there is the code that we're going to want for this particular lesson. So I'm going to select it all and copy it, and then I'm going to paste it into my test HTML. And you're going to see here basically the difference is we've got a little bit of page structure here. We've got banner, we've got a sidebar, a content area, and a footer. So this is just a little sample page. We also have a div here called wrapper that contains everything on the page. So we can say that the wrapper is the parent element of all of these other divs that are on our page. Now, we don't actually have a link to our style sheet, so we need to add that. So I'm going to go ahead and in the head section I'm going to use the link tag, and I'm going to go ahead and select my CSS style sheet for the value from my href attribute. And you'll remember the other attributes, we need relationship, and that's going to be for style sheet is going to be the value. Oops. We need the type attribute, and the value for that is going to be text CSS. Remember to close your quotation marks. And then we have the media attribute, which the value is going to be screen. And then we just close that with a closing bracket, no slashes. And just like before, I'm going to come in here to my style sheet, and you can see the way this looks right now. I'm going to come into my style sheet and just do a real quick H1 color, and now I see my headings are in red, so I know that the link that I created right here is actually working. Now, before we get started actually writing some code, let's talk about something called the CSS Box Model. And this might be something that you want to Google to find more about. And there are a lot of great articles out there on the CSS Box Model. But I have in my handout some notes on the box model. Scroll down here, and there it is. And the specific thing that I want to look at is this diagram right here. And I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here a little bit so we can actually, that's too much, so we can see this a little bit better. There we go. Now, there are 3 different keywords that I want you to remember starting off thinking about the box model. One is padding, second is border, the third is margin. Now, here we have an object. This could be a div, it could be a paragraph, it could be a heading, could be any HTML element at all. Actually, I should say it could be any HTML block level element at all. And this blue line represents the outer boundary of that object. Now you have outside of that object this area here, and this is called padding. Padding surrounds an object, but it comes in between the object and any border that you've placed around the object. This is referred to as the background area for the object. So the padding forms the object background area. And then we have a border here. And then after the border, you have this red area here, which is your margin area. This is the background area for the object. Your margin is the buffer area around the actual object. Now, that's not going to make a lot of sense until you actually start working with it. But I want you to remember the precedence here. The edge of the object, the padding, then the border, then the margin space. And if we have two elements that are right next to each other, you have that outer edge of the second object bumping up against the margin area for the object that preceded it. So we have margin area here, a border, padding, and then you have the object that's right here. So let's say we had 5 pixels of padding, 5 pixels of margin, and a 1 pixel border around all of these elements. That added up would be the space between the edge of this object and the edge of this object. Okay, here we are back inside of our HTML document. And first thing I actually want to do is take a look at this in design view. And you're going to notice that the content of this design goes all the way from one edge of the window to the other. And no matter how big or small the window is, that content is going to automatically fill that amount of space. So it's taking up 100% of the area. Well, most designs don't look like that. Most designs don't stretch from one end of the window to the other. And the reason for that is that different screens are different widths, different dimensions, and therefore it's really hard to get your layout to look the way you want it to using a fluid layout like that. It's not impossible, and many sites do it, but most sites, what they do is they define a width for their design, and then they center the content on the page or possibly leave it aligned over to the left. And if we take a look at our design, you're going to see that, where the overall design is constrained into a certain width, and then in this case it's centered on the page. So coming back in here to the code, that explains what we're going to do with this wrapper div. You remember I mentioned that this wrapper div contains all of the other elements on your page, and it's actually closing right down here. So if I want to constrain this design into a particular area and not have it expand and contract as I open and close different things to change the window size here, if I want to constrain that into a particular area, all I have to do is set the width for the wrapper. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my styles.css file now. And I'm going to go ahead and create a style for the wrapper. And since I'm targeting this element by using the ID, this is going to be an ID style. So I'm going to go ahead and do a number sign and then wrapper. And then an opening curly bracket. And the property that I'm going to go ahead and use here is width. And I'm going to say that the overall width of this object, the wrapper, should be 900 pixels wide. And then I'm going to go ahead and close my curly bracket. And now when I go ahead and look at this in design view, you can visually see how this is constrained into a smaller area. My wrapper now takes up 900 pixels. So the most anything inside of the wrapper, or the largest width of anything inside of the wrapper, is also 900 pixels. And I actually clicked over here, and that's the way I highlighted that area, but you can see the constraint that's been applied to this design. Now the next thing that we might want to do is we may want to center this content on the page as opposed to having it aligned to the left. If you want your design aligned to the left, you don't need to do anything else from this point. But if you want it centered, you will need to go ahead and apply the margin property. Now again, the margin property that we're going to use is going to set the amount of space top and bottom, but also left and right. Now when we're dealing with the margin property, and this is also true of the padding property, there are several ways that you can write this. Let me go ahead and show you. If I just go ahead and say margin, or actually, I'm going to go ahead and in our test.html here, what do I want to do? Well, let me just show you right now. If I say margin 20 pixels, that's going to place 20 pixels of margin on the top, bottom, left, and right of whatever object it's been applied to. So if you use one value with the margin property, it's going to use that same value top, bottom, left, and right. If I was to go ahead and use two values, let's say 20 pixels and 10 pixels, what this is going to do is it's going to place 20 pixels on the top and bottom of our object, and this is going to place 10 pixels on the left and the right. And I know we talked about this in an earlier segment, but just as important to sort of remember this. And if I go ahead and use four values, let's say I did 20 pixels, 10 pixels, 5 pixels, and 30 pixels. This is going to place 20 pixels on the top, 10 on the right, 5 on the bottom, and 30 on the left. So it's top, right, bottom, left. And you can remember that because it's just going clockwise around the design, starting at the 12 o'clock position. Top, right, bottom, left. Or 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and 9 o'clock. So there's several possible ways to write the margin property. You can also specify the exact side that you're applying the property to and leave the other sides ambiguous, or leave them whatever their default is. For instance, I could say margin dash left 30 pixels, or I could say margin top 20 pixels, margin right 5 pixels, margin left, or margin bottom. Oops, and I forgot my colon there. But you get the point, 20 pixels. So I can either combine them in some way here, or I can specify the size. And again, this works equally as well for margin or for padding. It's the exact same thing. So the value that we're going to go ahead and use for the wrapper is going to be margin, and then I want to set the top and the bottom margin, and I want that to be 0 pixels. I don't want any margin on the top and the bottom. But I want the left and the right sides to be evenly spaced. I want the same amount of space on the left as on the right so that it centers my design. And the key word for that is a little bit cryptic. It's auto. And auto will automatically balance both your left and your right margins out. And we'll go ahead and save that. Now when we look at this, you can see the design again is constrained into 900 pixels, and we have 0 margin on the top and on the bottom. We have an equal amount of margin on the left and the right. So that margin property can be very useful for you. Now, just to sort of call it out so we can see where it is, I'm actually going to apply a background color to my heading up here. And the heading, I'm going to go ahead and repin my folder list here. And the heading is actually in a div called banner. So I'm going to go ahead and do banner, opening curly bracket, background dash color, and then I can use my color picker here, and I'm going to go ahead and select this light orange color, and then we'll do a closing semicolon and a closing curly bracket. And now when we look at this, we can see that has been applied there. If I wanted to make this a little bit bigger, I could apply some padding onto the banner. If I was to do padding, let's say the top and the bottom, I want it to be 30 pixels, and the left and the right, I want it to be 0. We'll go ahead and put that in there and save it. And now you can see I've got a larger banner area. And I said 30 pixels top and 30 pixels on the bottom. If I was to go ahead and change that, let's say I wanted a different amount of space on the top as on the bottom, I could simply do, let's say 30 pixels on the top. I'm going to do 0 pixels on the right, 10 pixels on the bottom, and 0 pixels on the left. And there we go. So you can see there's a different amount of space there. And I could change this even more. Let's make it 50 and 5. Make it a little bit more obvious. And there we go. So you can see how you can use padding and margin to space things out. Now again, one of the things that initially confuses a lot of people when they're starting to deal with the box model properties is the difference between padding and margin. And here's the difference. I'm going to go ahead and add a border around my banner. So I've gone ahead and applied a 1 pixel black border that's going to be solid all the way around the banner. And you can now see that border. And you're going to notice that this area here is again the padding area. And it's filled in with that color. And remember when we talked about the box model, let me bring that back up here. When we talked about the box model, we said, okay, here's our object, here's our padding, and here's our border. So the padding is in between the edge of the object and the border. And that's exactly what we see here. We've got padding in here that's in between the contents of the object, in this case this H1, and the border. So the padding is on the inside of the border, not on the outside. Let's go ahead and change that slightly, and let's see how this would work. I'm going to go ahead and make this margin. So instead of applying padding, I'm applying margin space. And now you can see there's the object, but the margin space is outside of the colored box. So margin is on the outside and padding is on the inside. So I'm going to change that back to padding, and I'm going to go ahead and remove that border property. We're going to talk more about borders in just a little bit. And I'm going to save that. So here we are again. Now, the next element that we have is this navigation element right here. And again, you can see this goes all the way across the design. And that's, you can see Expression Web's visual aids there are showing you the outline of each element and how much space it's taking up. And if I was to select the sidebar, there's our sidebar. So right now navigation is taking up this full width here. And if I want this to be a left-hand sidebar, I don't want it to take up all the space. I want to constrain it into maybe 150 pixels. And that way I can move my content area up here into this area. So we can go ahead now, and I can go ahead and, again, that div has an ID of sidebar. So I can go ahead and do sidebar, curly bracket, and again I'm going to go ahead and set the width, but this time I'm going to set it for 150 pixels. And now when I go ahead and look at my design, you can see that's now been constrained into a smaller area. It's now into 150 pixels. And we may want to move this element away from the element above it and apply some background color in there just to make it stand out a little bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and go back into my styles, and I'm going to go ahead and say to apply some padding to this div, and I want there to be 20 pixels top and bottom and 0 pixels left and right. We'll save that. And actually I'm also going to apply a background color here. And the background color that we'll use is this light pink color right here, or purple. So we'll go ahead and take a look at our design, and there you go. I've got some padding on the top and the bottom, none on the left and the right. Now, if we wanted to push this out from the edge, so it's not right up against the edge, that's very possible also. I could simply come in here and say the padding should be 20 pixels top and bottom, and let's say 10 pixels left and right. And now you can see that's been pushed away from the edge. It doesn't look right with this up here, so let's go ahead and again play with our banner here a little bit. I want there to be 50 pixels top and 5 pixels on the bottom. I'm still going to say 0 on the right, but I want to match the padding on the left over here. So I'm going to make that 10 pixels. And now you can see it's been moved away, and those two are nicely aligned there. Now, the next thing that we need to go ahead and do is we need to change the width of our content area here. I actually need to fix that link there for the image as well. We need to change the width of the content area so that it will fit over here. And then we need to allow that content area to move up into this space. So let's go ahead and go into Code View again, and I'm actually going to scroll down here. Here is that image. And I'm going to go ahead and highlight the source here, type a quote, and use the pick URL option. And I'm just going to go ahead and grab a small image like this bottle from right here. Close my quote. And now when we look at it, there we go. Now I can see that image. So we're going to go ahead and now work with the content div. So I'm going to come into my styles and go ahead and do content. And I'm going to say the width of this is going to be 600 pixels. I'll go ahead and close that off and take a look at it, and you can see now the content area has now been constrained into a smaller area, but it still hasn't moved up in here. Now, in order to allow this content area to move up into this open space here, you need to tell the browser to float your navigation div over to the left. And what that's going to allow is it's going to allow this content area to move up here. So I'm going to go ahead and in the sidebar, I'm going to go ahead and add a property. I'm going to say float left right there. And then when I come in here, you can see now the content area has been allowed to move up into that particular area. Now I need to put a little bit of padding on here as well, because again this is right up against this, and I actually have some extra space right over here. Now I'm not actually going to put any left-hand padding on here. You're going to see why in just a moment. I'm going to go ahead and come back into my CSS, and the sidebar, the elements are moved down 20 pixels from the top and bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and say padding 20 pixels and then 0 pixels for left and right. And again, you're going to see what I'm going to show you in just a second with that. And now you can see that's been moved down there as well. And I could also make this a little bit larger if I wanted to. You know, I've got 900 pixels to work with, so I could make this area 700 pixels. Yeah, I can make it as big as I want or as small as I want. I'm going to make it 650 pixels. We'll save that and take a look at it there. Now, you can see the way this is appearing in design view right now. Let's go ahead and see how it would preview in a browser. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up in Chrome, and again you're going to notice a difference here, a dramatic difference between what's showing up in a browser and what's actually showing up in ExpressionWeb's design view here. So again, this is another indication of don't necessarily trust design view and what it's showing you. Always preview in a browser. If I close this page and reopen it, it's still giving me the same thing. So unlike earlier examples of this, this is something that ExpressionWeb is going to stick on. And it actually isn't specific to any browser. If I go ahead and look at this in Internet Explorer, you can see I'm getting the exact same results here. So that's the reason why I actually didn't add any padding over here, because we need to bump this whole content section over a little bit. And the easiest way to do that here is going to be to use the margin left property. So I'm going to go ahead and say margin dash left, and the sidebar is 150 pixels wide, and I want there to be some buffer in between my content area and my sidebar. So I'm going to say the margin left is going to be 180 pixels. And now when we look at this, you can see this has been bumped over a little bit. Now when I go ahead and preview this in a browser, you're going to see everything has been nicely bumped over. And I may want a little bit more spacing in there, so I can go ahead and instead of making it 180, I'm just going to make it an even 200. save that. You can see it's been moved over a little bit more. And let's look at it again in Internet Explorer here. And now you can see that's the case. And you would need to do a little bit of work on the padding up here to get these to line up and working the way you want them to. But you can see the way our margin, padding, width, those are all working together to allow you to position different elements on the page. Last thing we might want to do is apply a little bit of formatting to this footer area right here. So I can go ahead and again, this right here, the div is footer, or the ID is footer. So I can come in here and say footer. And I don't need to specify the width because I just want it to fill the whole area there. You could specify the width as 150 pixels, or I'm sorry, you could specify the width as 100% if you want to expressly say this should fill all the available area. And a lot of times I do that. But I'm going to go ahead and say this should have some padding on the top and bottom. I'm going to say 10 pixels and 0 pixels left and right. I want the text to be centered, so I'm going to use the text align property to center the text, and I'm going to go ahead and apply a background color. And we'll go ahead and use that pick color option there, and I'll select that light green color. And remember to close your style off. And now when we take a look at this, we can see the footer down at the bottom of the page. And again, these colors are not meant to show or to simulate full height columns and things like that. They're just meant to differentiate the different areas here. So that's a basic primer on the box model properties, margin and padding, as well as width. Now, height, same as width. It just specifies the height of different things. The one property that we didn't work with that I will show you right now is going to be the border property. And we actually looked at that just a little bit. And let's say I wanted a left-hand border, or let's say I wanted a bottom border in between my banner and these areas here. So I would want to put a bottom border on my banner area. I can simply go ahead and add that to the existing style definition. Now, the border property is just border. And when you specify a border, you need to give it 3 different values: the thickness of the line, the color of the line, and the style of the line. So the thickness, the color, and the style. So I'm going to say I want this to be a 3-pixel border. I'm going to make it large so it stands out. I'm going to go ahead and make it blue. And then I'm going to go ahead and make it solid. So I have a 3-pixel blue border on the bottom of my banner. And whoops, what happened there? It put a 3-pixel border all the way around my item. Just like you can specify top, bottom, left, and right for margin, you can do that exact same thing for border. If you just say border here, it's going to put the border all the way around the object. But I just wanted it on the bottom, so I can say border-bottom there. And let's see how that looks. And there I go. Now the border is just on the bottom. Now, CSS positioning and understanding the box model is one thing that even experienced designers sometimes get a little bit confused on. It's one of the more advanced concepts inside of CSS. And there's actually a lot more to CSS positioning than what I've shown you here. But this is the basics. as you go on, you're going to learn different techniques in different videos. Or you can go ahead and Google CSS Positioning and check out, there are a lot of great articles on CSS Positioning, show you different techniques that you can use. But the item that I'd like you most to take away from this is knowing that this is not a simple concept. This takes some work and some practice to really get down. So if this is a little bit confusing to you, don't worry about it. When we actually do our project, it'll make a little bit more sense. And as you work through other projects and do your own designs and play with things and do your own research, it's going to become more and more clear. And eventually you'll become a master at getting this all set up. So don't get discouraged if this seems a little bit cryptic right now. It just takes a little bit of practice. Well, that pretty much concludes our introduction to CSS. And you now know everything you basically need to do in order to work with and create this design here. And in the next video, we're going to go ahead and set up the CSS for this particular layout. I'll see you in the next video.